So the monetization of the game has been getting a lot of discussions, and I made a video on it talking about it, but I think it's time to make another one just because I have new thoughts on the whole subject, and I think it relates to my old one and how I need to, slap the two together and give my whole thoughts on everything. So basically what I thought before, and if you watch my other video about the monetization, which is still a good video to watch just because the fundamentals of what I said are not wrong, like talking about whether the season pass is worth it, which I still think it's worth it, and talking about the DX edition and stuff like that. That's all legitimate, but that was from a very idealistic way of viewing things, like about fairness, right? Like, is it fair? Essentially, like, is it fair versus what they've done versus how much we have to pay, blah, 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 all that stuff, right? This is talking about feelings. Now, people really do like to think in feelings, not even like to do it, but they just do think in feelings all the time. And no matter how rationally acceptable something can be, if it doesn't feel good, it's not good. So that's what we're gonna talk about here, right? The whole issue with this system is that it doesn't feel good. It's the same thing I talked about in my Barbatos video recently about how no matter how balanced you make it or whatever, which with Barbatos you can't, but no matter how balanced you make anything, if it doesn't feel good, it's not good, right? There's a lot of different ways I could explain that, but it's as simple as if it doesn't feel good, it's not good. In most situations, in a game like this where people play for enjoyment, right? Like, I'm not talking like, oh, something, whatever, other thing, not related. So, the biggest issue is that there's no reward for grinding. Now, some people are kind of like, I don't really want to grind the game. I don't want to, that's not my point. I just want to play the game for fun. I want to be having to grind up stuff. But it's not about the grinding. It's about being rewarded for playing. A lot of people weren't really going to end up doing a bunch of grinding anyway, because a lot of people will still play the game and put money into it and stuff like that without just hard grinding the game a lot to get the actual full amount of rewards they possibly could, sort of thing. But what it essentially does is it takes away this sort of extra feeling. Yeah, you have these beginner challenges, but they don't feel good, It's just like you're sitting there and then you blow through all of them except for the day thing, and you're like, okay, I have to wait 3 more days. Yay. It's time gated, so it doesn't feel like you're actually being rewarded for it. It feels like you're just slogging through it. Games have progressed past this sort of mentality that every game has added in an RPG element essentially to games that didn't really deserve it, didn't really justify having it normally. You have a game like Call of Duty, right? In the old Call of Duty days, there was no loot boxes. It was all just it was in the game. You just play the game over and over and over and over and over again. And there was some customizability and stuff like that, but it wasn't it wasn't nearly like this sort of thing. And that was that. But then when games started throwing in loot boxes and cosmetics and emotes and all that sort of stuff, it changed that, and it gave this sort of excitement, right? I always talk about Overwatch, but with Overwatch, even though for me with the loot boxes I ended up having 450 or so unopened on my main account, there was something still exciting about getting it, right? Something about it just having this little number pop up on your screen, and then you press it and then it clicks and you get some random stuff, and that's that. There was just something extra, and the problem with this game is it doesn't have that. Yeah, you get some loot boxes every now and then from the battle pass, but it feels like it feels like instead of you constantly building them up and gaining more, it feels like a very, very fixed resource. So when I get a loot box and I spend it and I get whatever is from it, I don't feel like, oh, it's okay, I'll get another one. I just feel like I'm losing something. Yeah, sometimes I get something out of it, sometimes I don't, but I just feel like I'm losing something, basically. It makes the game feel, and that's part of that, right? But the whole thing just makes the game feel kind of empty. It makes it feel like one of these old games in which you have the same gameplay loop, and you do it again and again and again and again. If you like it enough, you keep playing. If you don't, you don't. It doesn't have the sort of extra open expansiveness, which is hugely buffed by just having something to do in between the games, loot boxes to open essentially, currency to gain, you're working towards something an RPG experience. Now you might look at me and be like, Dunmere, they need the money. You can't just try and take away the money from the company. It doesn't work like that. And yeah, I totally do understand that. Companies really do need to make money on games like this, because if they don't, then the game goes away because it's a product. It's not making any money. You get rid of it. However, they've given us a bunch of free stuff actually. It's just kind of hard to tell, and it doesn't feel good to get it. I calculated it out, and there's 8 supply pods they gave you in the season pass if you finish it all the way through. And this is the free version. And then there's 2,000 credits you get from that too. And then there's an additional 14 loot boxes that you get from the beginner challenges. So we're looking at 22 loot boxes and 2,000 credits. So I did the math because every loot box costs 360 capital points. So we're looking at about 7,960, I think it was, credits worth of loot boxes they're giving us. And an additional 2,000, so we're looking about 10,000 credits of stuff. Now, you might want to do the numbers, and like, I know that there's a bigger incentive to buy the mobile suits than there is to buy the cap or to buy the supply pod. So, all right, maybe bump it down by like 40%. So we're looking at 6,000 capital points that they've given us for free, essentially, like effective, right? Whatever we want to call it. And then if you were to take the game that they expect people to play and say, okay, the average player, we expect them to play about like, 200 games a season, right? If you gave them 30 capital per game, that would be the same total number, right? Like, you could do it a little bit less. You could do it like 10 or 15 and then like have the supply pods they give you elsewhere. But it would actually make the game feel better because it would feel like you're actually getting stuff for it, Like, the fact that you can't do that makes people feel this sort of emptiness and makes them feel like they can't grind the game, like there's nowhere to go with it, like it's just time gated, And so the fact that they're like doing it like this is not really ideal at all, especially because you have to factor in the fact that people will just quit the game. People have gotten used to this sort of like RPG-esque sort of reality in these games. Like, if you look at all the other big games, you can grind out stuff, you can get cosmetics, you can get these things within the game by just playing the game, Like, people who are used to Overwatch, they got a loot box every single level forever. But that's not how it is in this game. And so, I might have done the math a little bit weird and whatever, but they could have found a way to give a decent amount of capital, halved the other cosmetic stuff that they're giving us, or even just increase the amount of cosmetics that you could buy, making more people want to buy them, right? And you could have solved this problem in a really easy and consistent way that people will like and will feel good. And they didn't do that, and it's gonna cause people to quit, to be honest. Like I said, I'm not trying to doomer too hard here, but there's a lot of people who get in and they're like, oh, well, can't get anything for free, and these characters are insane, so I quit. No point. Pay to win. And the sort of pay to win mentality can get dropped down a bunch if it's accessible through the free path, which it is, but people don't feel like it is. Because a pay to win situation that's accessible through a free path over time doesn't become pay to win, it becomes pay to get an early advantage, essentially. And that doesn't bother free to play players as much as pay to win does. Because pay to win feels like this impenetrable wall that you can never get past. Like, oh, well, this game that's supposed to be fair, it's supposed to be a solid competitive game. It doesn't matter because I can't get past that because I'm free to play. So, rant over for that section. I did also want to stop on to something also, which is a common misconception that they just went out and put a little notice on, guaranteeing that's not the case. They have said for sure Evo coins do not expire. There was a lot of talk about that recently, and people were, throwing that onto the fire of why the game has issues, but fortunately, that's not one of them. That's one of the things that we can appreciate that the devs decided not to do to make our earned currency not expire. So, I'm gonna go ahead and end this video, guys. If you liked it, give it a like, right? Subscribe to the channel, all that garbage. I'll continue covering everything and talking about monetization again in the future, I'm sure. So, yeah. If you're looking for some more Gundam Evolution videos, then make sure to check out my mobile suit guides. I made one for all original to 14 mobile suits, and I did a Should You Main guide series also, covering the same mobile suits and talking about whether you should actually main them in Gundam Evolution or not.